The wind didn't just blow in the Bitterroot Mountains. It screamed, a high-pitched, tearing sound that felt like it was ripping the very atmosphere apart, shredding the last vestiges of the world we used to know. It was a desolate, howling void that reminded me, with every freezing gust, that the United States of America, the superpower, the dream, the unbreakable fortress, was dead. I adjusted the strap of my heavy Alice pack, the nylon biting into my shoulder through the layers of my grime-encrusted North Face jacket. The weight was familiar, a grounding pressure and a reality that had lost all gravity. Inside that pack was my life, 3 MREs, Menu 18, beef ravioli, the only ones I could scavenge from the wreck of a National Guard convoy outside Missoula. A life straw that was nearing the end of its filtration capacity, 2 boxes of 5.56 NATO rounds, and a ruggedized ham radio that had been broadcasting nothing but static for 72 hours. My boots, heavy Bates tactical stompers I'd picked up at a surplus store in Spokane before the borders closed, crunched violently against the frost-hardened scree. Every step was a calculated risk. Sound carried in this valley. Sound was death. I paused, my breath pluming in white clouds of condensation before me, blending with the mist that clung to the pines like phantom limbs. I gripped the pistol grip of my custom-built AR-15, the Cerakote finish scratched and worn, the Magpul furniture scuffed from weeks of crawling through mud and asphalt. I scanned the ridgeline. The optics, a battered EOTech holographic sight, flickered slightly, the battery dying, another casualty of the collapse. But I didn't need the red dot to see the anomaly in the rock face 300 yards up. It wasn't a natural formation. Nature doesn't build in straight lines. Nature doesn't pour reinforced concrete into the side of a granite mountain. It was gray, flat, and aggressively artificial against the chaotic, organic sprawl of the Montana wilderness. A bunker. Not a prepper's hole in the ground, not some backyard fallout shelter dug by a paranoid accountant from Billings. This was military grade. This was government. The sheer scale of the blast door, barely visible through the overgrowth of spruce and hemlock, suggested deep state funding, the kind of black budget architecture that didn't appear on any map I'd ever downloaded. My heart hammered against my ribs, a erratic rhythm of hope and terror. If this was what I thought it was, it could mean food. It could mean power, warmth, a hardened shelter against the infected hordes that were currently migrating north from the ruins of Salt Lake City. But it could also mean something worse. The U.S. military didn't abandon sites like this without a reason. I wiped a smear of sweat and grime from my forehead, my tactical gloves stiff with dried blood, not mine, and began the ascent. The slope was steep, a punishing 40-degree incline of loose shale and frozen mud. I moved low, keeping my profile broken by the tree line, utilizing the survival skills my father had drilled into me during our hunting trips in the Cascades. Move, stop, listen. Move, stop, listen. The silence of the forest was heavy, pregnant with a tension that felt like a physical weight pressing down on my skull. I reached the perimeter fence first. It was 12 feet high, topped with razor wire that had rusted into a crown of thorns. Signs were zip-tied to the mesh every 50 feet. Their white paint faded and peeling, but the bold red lettering was still legible, shouting authority into the void. U.S. government property and no trespassing, use of deadly force authorized. I stared at the sign, a bitter laugh bubbling up in my throat. Deadly force. Who was left to authorize it? The President? The Joint Chiefs? They were likely dust, or worse, shambling through the corridors of the Pentagon with hunger in their eyes. I pulled a pair of bolt cutters from the side pouch of my pack. The metal groaned as I sheared through the chain link, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. I froze, waiting, watching. Nothing. No sirens, no automated turrets, no patrols. Just the wind and the swaying pines. I slipped through the gap, the jagged wire snagging on my sleeve, tearing a small hole in the Gore-Tex. I ignored it. I was inside. The approach to the main entrance was paved, a cracked slab of concrete that nature was slowly reclaiming. Weeds grew through the fissures, tough, resilient things that didn't care about nuclear winters or biological collapses. The blast door was colossal. Solid steel, easily 2 feet thick. Painted a dull, industrial olive drab that was now streaked with mineral deposits and rust. A keypad was mounted on the wall to the right, its buttons melted, destroyed. Someone had tried to get in, or keep something in, with a thermite charge. But the door stood fast. However, next to the main slab, there was a smaller maintenance hatch. It was slightly ajar. Just an inch. A slice of darkness that looked deeper than the night itself. I approached it with my rifle raised, the barrel sweeping the area. The smell hit me before I even touched the metal. It was the scent of stale, recycled air, mixed with the metallic tang of hydraulic fluid and something else, something organic, sweet, and rotting. The smell of a tomb. I hooked my fingers into the gap of the hatch. It was heavy, grinding against its hinges with a screech that made my teeth ache. I pulled, straining, my boots slipping on the concrete, until the gap was wide enough for me to squeeze through. I clicked on my tactical light, the surefire beam cutting a cone of blinding white through the gloom. Dust motes danced in the light, swirling in the disturbed air. I stepped inside. The temperature dropped. Instantly. It was at least 20 degrees colder in here. I was in an airlock, a decontamination chamber. Yellow hazmat suits hung on hooks along the wall, limp and empty, like shed skins. A Geiger counter mounted on the wall was dead silent. No radiation. That was good. Or maybe it was broken. I couldn't trust anything. I moved to the inner door. This one was unlocked. The wheel turned to the open position. I pushed it open and stepped into the main corridor. It was vast, a tunnel of concrete that stretched into the darkness, lined with pipes and conduit. Red emergency lights flickered rhythmically further down, pulsating like a slow, dying heartbeat. The walls were painted with a stripe of color at waist height, blue for command, yellow for engineering, green for medical. I followed the blue. The silence in here was different than outside. It was pressurized. Artificial. The sound of my own breathing was deafening. I passed the security checkpoint, the glass booth shattered, a skeletal hand still gripping a faded ID badge on the desk. I shone my light on the badge. Department of Defense Level 5 clearance. Level 5. That was high. That was continuity of government high. I kept moving, my footsteps echoing wetly on the linoleum floor. There were puddles here, condensation dripping from the ceiling pipes. The deeper I went, the more signs of struggle I saw. Bullet holes pocked the concrete walls. Scorch marks on the ceiling. Shell casings littered the floor, 5.56 brass, same as mine. A firefight. A desperate one. But there were no bodies. Just the casings and the dried, black smears of blood that looked like Rorschach tests in the flashlight beam. I reached a junction. To the left, the mess hall and barracks. To the right, the command center. I turned right. The corridor widened here. Propaganda posters from the late 2020s still clung to the walls. Strength through unity, prepare today, survive tomorrow. Irony so thick you could choke on it. I saw a discarded tactical helmet on the floor, the night vision goggles smashed. I nudged it with my boot. It was empty. Where were they? Where was the garrison? You don't leave a bunker like this unmanned. Unless they left. Or unless they were taken. I found the entrance to the command center. The double doors were blown off there. Hinges, lying twisted on the floor. I stepped over them, raising my rifle, my finger tightening on the trigger. The room beyond was massive, a tiered amphitheater of desks and monitors, dominated by a massive screen on the far wall. The screen was dead, a black mirror reflecting my small, insignificant light. But the consoles, some of them were still active. Amber text scrolled across CRT monitors, cascading lines of code and status reports. System critical. Containment failure. Sector 7 breach. I moved to the nearest terminal, wiping a layer of dust from the keyboard. The chair was overturned. A coffee mug, shattered, lay in a pool of dried brown liquid. I looked at the screen. The date on the last log entry was 6 months ago. The day the West Coast went dark. I began to read the logs, my eyes scanning the text rapidly. It was a chaotic record of the final days. Reports of riots in Seattle, the fall of the grid in California. The first confirmed cases of the pathogen in the ranks. And then the order. Executive Order 14 Alpha. Sealed the facility. Initiate Protocol Black. Protocol Black. I'd heard rumors on the shortwave radio before the networks died. Rumors of purge protocols. Of prioritizing assets over people. My stomach churned. I wasn't just in a bunker. I was in a tomb built by the very people who were supposed to save us. A sound stopped me cold. A scrape. Metal on concrete. It came from below. From the vents. I spun around, my light slashing through the shadows. The command center had a lower level, a server farm visible through a grate in the floor. I shone the light down. Nothing but cables and blinking server racks. But then I heard it again. A low, guttural chittering. Not human. Not animal. It was the sound of wet lungs and clicking teeth. The sound of the infected. But different. Heavier. I backed away from the terminal, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't alone. And whatever was down there, it knew I was here. I checked my magazine. 20 rounds left. I had one spare in the pack. 40 rounds against the unknown. I retreated to the doorway, keeping my weapon trained on the grate. The chittering grew louder, multiplying. It wasn't one thing. It was many. I needed a defensible position. I needed to find the armory. I sprinted back into the corridor, abandoning stealth. My boots hammered the floor. I followed the signs for security/armory. The red emergency lights seemed to pulse faster now. Syncing with my panic. I turned a corner and skidded to a halt. The corridor ahead was blocked. A barricade of desks, lockers, and filing cabinets had been erected, a desperate wall of office furniture. And behind it, shadows moved. Not the slow, shambling movement of the surface walkers. These shadows darted. They were fast. I raised my rifle, the flashlight beam trembling. "Identify yourself!" I screamed, my voice cracking, rusty from days of disuse. The only answer was a shriek that pierced my eardrums, a sound of pure, predatory hunger. Then they came over the barricade. Pale, emaciated figures, wearing the tattered remains of U.S. Army fatigues. But their skin was gray, translucent, stretched tight over distorted bones. Their eyes were gone, replaced by weeping black hollows. They moved on all fours, scrambling like spiders. I fired. The boom of the AR-15 was thunderous in the confined space. The muzzle flash illuminated the horror in strobing frames. One of the creatures took a round to the shoulder, spinning back, but it didn't stop. It hissed and lunged again. I adjusted my aim. Headshots. It had to be headshots. I fired again. Pop! The lead creature's skull disintegrated, black fluid spraying the wall. I dropped one, then another. But there were more, pouring over the barricade like water. I turned and ran. I ran back towards the airlock, back towards the cold Montana air. But the corridor had changed. The blast door. I heard it grinding. Someone, or something, was closing the main seal. I was being locked in. Trapped in the belly of the beast with the ghosts of the American war machine. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a shelter. It was a feeding ground. The sound of a 10-ton lead-line door sealing isn't a thud. It's a funeral toll. It's a deep, resonant ka-chunk that vibrates through the soles of your boots and settles in the pit of your stomach like swallowed lead. I watched the hairline crack of daylight vanish, swallowed by the rusty teeth of the locking mechanism. The hydraulic hiss that followed was the sound of my coffin being nailed shut. The air pressure in the corridor shifted immediately. My ears popped, a sharp, stabbing pain that momentarily drowned out the scrabbling horror behind me. I didn't waste time banging on the steel. I knew military specs. That door was rated to withstand a direct hit from a megaton warhead. My fist wouldn't even scratch the paint. I spun around, bringing the AR-15 back up to a high-ready position. The strobing muzzle flash from my earlier volley had left afterimages dancing in my vision, purple and green spots overlaying the gloom. But I didn't need perfect sight to know they were coming. The sound was distinct, wet slaps of flesh on concrete, the clicking of elongated fingernails, the guttural, wet respiration of things that should have been dead decades ago. I clicked my surefire weapon light on. The beam cut through the stale, dust-mote-filled air like a lightsaber. They were hesitating at the barricade I'd just abandoned. The light seemed to hurt them. The lead creature, the one missing half its jaw from my earlier panic fire, recoiled, shielding its eyeless face with a pale, emaciated arm. They were photosensitive. That was a win, however small. But my battery life wasn't infinite, and neither was my ammo. I had 3 mags of 5.56 left on my chest rig and 1 in the gun. Maybe 120 rounds to fight my way through a subterranean city designed to house 1,000 people. Move, I whispered to myself, the word harsh and scraping in my dry throat. Move or die. I broke into a sprint, heading deeper into the facility. The corridor stretched out before me, an endless throat of gray concrete and peeling yellow paint. The floor was littered with the detritus of a panicked evacuation, overturned file cabinets, scattered papers yellowed with age, gas masks with cracked lenses staring up like hollow skulls. I hurdled a tipped-over gurney, the wheels spinning freely in the draft of my passing. To my left, a stencil on the wall read, Level 1, Security and Decontamination. To my right, a stairwell door hung off its top hinge. I kicked it open, the metal screaming against the frame, and leveled my rifle down the shaft. Darkness. Absolute, heavy darkness that seemed to swallow the light beam after 20 feet. But I couldn't stay on the main level. It was a kill box. Long sight lines work both ways, and if they swarmed, I'd be overrun. I needed choke points. I needed to get to the control center. I took the stairs 2 at a time, the echo of my boots sounding like gunshots in the confined vertical shaft. The air grew colder as I descended, the smell of pine and mountain air replaced by the copper tang of old blood and the sulphurous stench of rot. Level 2, Habitation and Mess. I shoulder-checked the door to Level 2. It held. Locked. I slammed my shoulder into it again, panic rising in my chest as I heard the scuttling sounds entering the stairwell above me. They were in the shaft. "Come on, you piece of SHTF!" I grunted, backing up and kicking the handle with everything I had. The rusted mechanism gave way with a snap, and I tumbled into the hallway of Level 2 just as a shadow detached itself from the ceiling of the stairwell. I slammed the door shut and jammed the barrel of my rifle through the handle loops, effectively barring it. A second later, a heavy body slammed against the other side. The metal groaned. Then the scratching started. Frenzied, manic scratching, like a dog trying to dig through a floorboard, but with the strength of a hydraulic press. I backed away, chest heaving, sweat stinging my eyes. I was in a hallway lined with barracks doors. This was where the soldiers lived, where they slept. The flickering emergency lights here were dim orange, casting long, unnatural shadows. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I needed to know what the hell was happening. I moved silently down the hall, checking corners. Room 204. Room 205. The doors were open. Inside, rusted bunk beds stood in silent rows. Some still had bedding, moth-eaten wool blankets with the U.S. stamp. But it was the walls that drew my attention. In room 206, the walls were covered in writing. Not graffiti. Scrawlings. Desperate, frantic scribbles in black marker, charcoal. Maybe even dried blood. They drink the oil. Obsidian is a lie. Do not look at the frequencies. And over again, a single phrase, the god in the shale. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the subterranean temperature. This wasn't just a mutant outbreak, or a viral lab leak. This felt older. I moved to the end of the hall, toward the mess hall. The double doors were propped open with a stack of MRE crates. The smell hit me then, a wave of rancid meat so potent I nearly gagged. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and swept the room with my light. Tables were overturned. Trays were scattered. But in the center of the room, the tables had been cleared to form a circle. And in the center of that circle was a pile. It was a mound of biomass. Bones, uniforms, tactical gear, all fused together with that same black, viscous fluid I had seen spraying from the creature's head. It looked like a nest. Or an altar. I stepped closer, my boots sticking slightly to the floor. The black sludge coated everything. It wasn't just liquid, it seemed to pulse, reacting to the proximity of my flashlight. Suddenly, a radio crackled. The sound was so loud in the silence that I nearly pulled the trigger. It came from a corpse slumped against the serving counter. A skeletal figure in tattered fatigues, a headset still clamped over its skull. Sector 4. Breach, containment lost. Colonel, the subjects are adapting. The voice was on a loop. A recording. I approached the corpse. The name tag read Holloway. I reached out and carefully lifted the headset off the skull. The bone was stained black. The ear cups were filled with the sludge. I picked up the receiver unit on the counter. It was an old military field recorder, battery light blinking red. Dying. I hit the rewind button. The tape whirred sluggishly. I pressed play. Day 40. A voice rasped. It was Holloway. But he sounded lucid. Asterisk. The blockade is holding for now. But we can hear them in the vents. We tried to synthesize the fluid found in the shale deposit during the excavation. Project Obsidian. Command said it was a new fuel source. Infinite energy. Instead, it's a mutagen. But it's not just biological. It's cognitive. It rewrites the mind before it rewrites the body. Jenkins started eating the grease from the mess hall fryers yesterday. Just scooping it into his mouth. Said he needed the viscosity. Then his eyes fell out. Asterisk. There was a pause on the tape, filled with the sound of distant screaming. Asterisk. If anyone finds this, the armory on level 3 is stocked. We moved the heavy ordnance down there to defend the reactor. But the elevator is cut. You have to use the maintenance ladders and the ventilation shafts. God help you. God help us all. This isn't America anymore. This is Hell's basement. Asterisk. The tape clicked off. Level 3. The armory. And the reactor. I looked at the rifle in my hands. I needed that heavy ordnance. If there were more of those things, hundreds of them, if the size of the barracks was any indication, I couldn't fight them with a varmint rifle. But the vents? The tape said they were in the vents. A metallic clang echoed from the hallway I had just come from. The rifle barring the stairwell door. It had given way. They were on the floor. I scrambled over the serving counter, dropping into the kitchen area. Stainless steel prep tables, industrial ovens. I saw a vent grate near the floor. Behind a massive dough mixer. It was my only way out. I could hear them in the mess hall now. The clicking of claws on the linoleum. Sniffing. They could smell me. They could smell the fresh meat. The sweat, the fear. I kicked the grate. It was rusted shut. No, 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 I hissed. I reversed my rifle and slammed the buttstock into the grate. Once. Twice. The metal mesh bent. The sounds in the mess hall stopped. Silence. They had heard me. I heard a low, chittering shriek, and then the sound of stampeding feet. I slammed the stock into the grate one last time. It popped inward with a screech of torn metal. I threw myself into the duct, dragging my pack and rifle behind me, just as a hand, gray, elongated, with too many joints, slapped the space where my ankle had been a second before. I scrambled backward, deeper into the duct, kicking out blindly. My boot connected with something wet and hard. A hiss of rage echoed down the metal tunnel. I fired a single round blindly back toward the opening. The bang was deafening in the enclosed space, ringing my ears like church bells. The muzzle flash lit up the face of the pursuer for a split second. It wasn't just a monster. It was wearing a tattered uniform. I saw a name tag. Jenkins. It was the man from the tape. His mouth was unhinged, a circular maw of needle teeth dripping with black oil. I scrambled faster, elbows and knees banging against the galvanized steel. The duct was tight, maybe 3 feet square. I was crawling through the intestines of the bunker. The air here was thick, heavy with the smell of ozone and something sweet, like rotting flowers. I crawled for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The sound of pursuit faded. But I knew they were tracking me. They knew these tunnels better than I did. They lived in them. I came to a junction. The airflow was stronger here. A vertical shaft dropped down into darkness. A rusted ladder rung bolted to the side. This had to be the maintenance access Holloway mentioned. I peered over the edge. The beam of my light didn't hit the bottom. It just illuminated rusted rebar and slick, wet concrete walls. I swung my legs out and began the descent. The ladder was treacherous. The rungs were coated in that same black slime. My gloves slipped. I had to grip tight. My forearms burning. 10 feet down. 20. 50. The air grew hotter. Humid. Suddenly my foot slipped. I gasped, grabbing the rung above me with both hands, my rifle swinging wildly on its sling, banging against the wall. I hung there, heart hammering against my ribs, dangling over the abyss. I looked down. And I saw lights. Not emergency lights. Bioluminescence. Far below. Maybe another 100 feet, the shaft opened up into a massive cavern. It wasn't concrete anymore. It was natural rock. And covering the walls were sacs. Translucent, pulsing sacs. Glowing with a faint, sickly green light. Inside them, curled shapes. I was looking at a nursery. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and forced myself to keep moving. I had to reach level 3 before I fell or before whatever was guarding those eggs looked up. I found a service hatch about 30 feet further down. Stenciled in fading white paint, Level 3 Armory/Reactor Control. I braced my legs against the sides of the shaft and spun the wheel on the hatch. It was stiff, seized by time and rust. I gritted my teeth and put my back into it. With a groan of protest, the wheel turned. I pushed the hatch open and tumbled out onto a grated metal walkway. I was in a massive hangar-like space. This was the heart of the facility. To my left, a row of Humvees sat, silent and dusty. To my right, cages of chain-link fence ran floor to ceiling. The armory. But it was what was in the center of the room that stopped me cold. The reactor wasn't a standard nuclear pile. It was a containment unit. A massive glass and steel cylinder, 3 stories tall. And inside the glass was the obsidian. A towering, jagged shard of black rock suspended in a magnetic field. It was weeping. Black fluid cascaded down its sides, pooling at the bottom of the chamber where pumps were actively, still, after all these years, cycling it into tanks. The fuel. But the glass was cracked. A spiderweb fracture ran up the side of the containment unit. And the black fluid was leaking out, dripping onto the floor of the hangar, feeding the growth that covered the floor like a fungal carpet. I moved toward the armory cages, stepping carefully on the metal grating to avoid the organic matter below. I reached the first cage. Locked. Inside. Racks of M4S Mossberg shotguns, crates of ammo. I didn't have the key. I looked around for a tool, a rock, anything. My eyes landed on a skeletal corpse sitting in a chair inside the cage. Office. It had a key ring on its belt. I raised my rifle and fired a single shot at the lock of the cage door. The sparks flew, and the lock shattered. I kicked the door open. I was like a kid in a candy store, if the candy store was designed for World War III. I grabbed a fresh tactical vest, swapping my plates. I found boxes of 5.56 green tip. I loaded every mag I had. I grabbed 2 fragmentation grenades and hooked them to my belt. I found a Mossberg 590 shockwave and strapped it to my pack as a backup. I felt stronger. Armed. Dangerous. But then I heard it. Not a hiss. Not a scratch. A voice. Help me. It was coming from the reactor chamber. I froze. It was a human voice. Weak, parched, but human. I moved out of the armory, weapon raised. Approaching the massive glass cylinder. I skirted the edge of the black pool. Hello? I called out. Who's there? Don't let them in. I walked around the curve of the reactor. Strapped to the side of the obsidian shard, inside the glass, was a man. Or what was left of one. Tubes ran into his arms, his neck, his eyes. He was fused to the rock. The black fluid was being pumped through him. He looked at me. His eyes were entirely black, no whites, no irises. But he was crying clear tears. Kill me, he whispered. His voice was amplified by the glass, vibrating in my skull. Please. I am the broadcast. I am the signal. I lowered my rifle slightly, horror washing over me. Who are you? I was Anderson, the thing said. Now I am just the router. They use my brain to control the others. The hive. If I live, they hunt. If I die, they sleep. He twitched, his body spasms sending ripples through the black fluid. They are coming. Anderson gasped. I can feel them. They know you are here. They are bringing the mother. The mother? The floor shook. Boom. Boom. It wasn't artillery. It was footsteps. Massive. Heavy footsteps coming from the far side of the hangar, from the darkness beyond the Humvees. Run, Anderson screamed, his voice distorting into a digital screech. Run! A shape emerged from the shadows. It was gargantuan. At least 12 feet tall. It looked like a fusion of human and arachnid, bloated and dripping. Its legs were made of fused rifles and rebar, shoved into its own flesh. Like prosthetics. Its face was a cluster of human faces, all screaming in silent agony, fused together into a chitinous mask. The mother. It roared, a sound that shattered the remaining floodlights in the room, plunging us into near darkness, lit only by the pulsing green glow of the obsidian and the strobe of my flashlight. I didn't think. I raised the AR-15. Eat lead, you ugly son of a B*TCH. I held the trigger down. Full auto. The rifle bucked against my shoulder, spitting fire. The round sparked off the creature's armored carapace. Chunks of black flesh flying. It didn't stop. It charged. I scrambled back, fumbling for a grenade. I pulled the pin and hurled it. Boom. The explosion rocked the hangar. Shrapnel pinged off the reactor glass. The creature stumbled, one of its rebar legs shattered. It shrieked, a sound of 1,000 voices screaming in unison. I turned and ran toward the far exit, toward the sign that read Emergency Evacuation Tram System. I had the firepower now. I knew the stakes. But I wasn't fighting for territory anymore. I was fighting to keep my soul from being pumped into a black rock. I hit the crash bar on the exit door and burst into a tunnel. Tracks ran down the center. A tram car sat there, rusted but intact. I vaulted into the driver's seat. No keys. Just a big red button labeled Engage. I smashed it with my fist. Sparks showered from the overhead pantograph. The electric motor groaned, then whined. The car lurched forward. Behind me. The door I had just come through exploded inward. The mother squeezed through, its multiple limbs tearing the steel frame like wet cardboard. The tram picked up speed. 10 miles per hour. 20. The creature was galloping behind me, closing the distance. I leaned up the side of the tram, the Mossberg shockwave in my hand. Come and get it. I racked the slide and fired. The buckshot hit the creature in its cluster of eyes. It faltered, stumbling on the tracks. The tram accelerated, leaving the nightmare behind in the darkness. I slumped back into the seat. Adrenaline crashing out of my system, leaving me shaking. The tram was moving deeper into the mountain, toward the unknown. I looked at the dashboard. A GPS map flickered to life on a CRT screen. Destination, Site B. Location, Yellowstone Caldera. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a bunker in Montana. This was a transit system. And Site B. If the obsidian was here. What the hell was waiting for me under Yellowstone? The tram rattled on, carrying me further into the dark heart of America. The darkness of the tunnel wasn't just an absence of light. It was a physical weight. The tram, a sleek bullet of brushed aluminum that looked far too advanced for the 1980s brutalism of the bunker above, didn't rattle on the tracks anymore. The vibration had smoothed out into a high-pitched, magnetic hum. I looked at the speedometer on the retrofuturistic dashboard. 450 mph. I gripped the safety bar with a white-knuckled hand. The Mossberg shockwave resting across my lap. The barrel was still hot, the smell of burnt gunpowder mixing with the recycled, stale air of the cabin. 450 miles per hour. Underground. In the dark. My mind tried to do the math through the fog of adrenaline. Montana to Yellowstone. That was a couple of 100 miles. At this speed, I'd be crossing state lines beneath the crust of the earth in less than 30 minutes. It was impossible. The engineering required to bore a vacuum tunnel this straight, this long, through the chaotic geology of the Rocky Mountains. It shouldn't exist. It was a multi-trillion-dollar secret buried beneath the national debt and amber waves of grain. The GPS dot on the CRT screen blinked rhythmically, inching closer to the glowing red blotch labeled Site B. I checked the shotgun. 4 shells in the tube. 3 in the side saddle. I had a pouch of loose buckshot on my belt, maybe 10 rounds total. Against that thing, that obsidian nightmare back at the launch bay, it felt like carrying a slingshot to a tank fight. I took a pull from my canteen, the lukewarm water tasting like plastic and fear. I needed to stabilize. I was Bert. I explored abandoned strip malls and defunct factories. I dealt with raccoons and homeless squatters. I didn't deal with subterranean transit systems built by a shadow government to ferry monsters to a supervolcano. Then the air changed. Even inside the sealed cabin, I felt the pressure drop. The hum of the magnetic levitation drive deepened, shifting down an octave. The darkness outside the thick polycarbonate windows began to break. First, it was just amber marker lights whizzing by like tracer fire. Then, illuminated concrete support pillars. Massive columns 50 feet thick, blurring into a gray wall. The tram began to decelerate. The G-force pressed me forward against the harness. Asterisk 300 mph. 150 miles per hour. 60 mph. Asterisk. The tunnel widened. The ceiling vaulted upward, vanishing into gloom. I stood up, pressing my face to the glass, and my breath hitched in my throat. We weren't in a tunnel anymore. We were in a cavern. A cavern so vast it defied logic. Floodlights, the size of semi-trucks, hung from a steel lattice miles above, casting sickly yellow pools of light onto a landscape of industrial madness. Below the track, a sprawling complex of cooling towers, catwalks, and containment domes stretched out like a subterranean city. And everywhere there was steam. Thick, roiling clouds of white vapor vented from the earth, hissing like a dying beast. The smell hit the cabin filters a second later, sulfur, rotten eggs and brimstone. We were right on top of the magma chamber. The heart of Yellowstone. The tram banked hard to the right, spiraling down a massive corkscrew track toward a central docking platform suspended over a chasm that glowed with a dull, menacing red light. Destination reached, the screen flashed green. The brakes hissed, a pneumatic scream that echoed in the vastness. The tram locked into a docking cradle with a bone-jarring thud. The doors hissed open. The heat was immediate. It wasn't the dry heat of a desert. It was heavy, wet, and aggressive. It smelled of ozone, sulfur, and something else, something coppery. Like old blood drying on hot iron. I stepped out onto the platform, the Mossberg raised. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small, swallowed instantly by the cavernous space. Silence. Just the rhythmic thrum hiss of massive ventilation fans turning slowly in the distance. The platform was a grid of steel grating. I looked down through the mesh. Nothing but darkness. For hundreds of feet, and then that dull red glow deep below. The magma. I moved toward the airlock doors labeled Sector 7 Geothermal Containment. The doors were blast-proof steel, 2 feet thick, but they were currently wedged open by a forklift. I approached slowly, the shotgun stock pressed into my hip. The forklift was overturned. The hydraulic fluid had leaked out, forming a sticky black pool. But it wasn't just fluid. There were drag marks. Deep gouges in the steel floor, like someone had dragged a heavy safe, or a body, through the spilled oil. I squeezed through the gap in the doors and entered the facility proper. It looked like NASA had mated with a prison. Banks of computer terminals sat dormant, covered in a thick layer of gray dust. The walls were lined with lockers and hazmat suits hanging like ghostly skins. I found a desk with a nameplate, Dr. A. Vance Project Tartarus. Tartarus. The Greek hell. Fitting. There was a clipboard on the desk. The paper was yellowed and brittle. I picked it up, the pages crinkling under my thumb. It was a shift log, dated October 14, 1989. *0800, thermal spikes in Shaft 4. The membrane is thinning faster than anticipated. *1200, seismic tremors localized to containment unit alpha. The subjects are agitated by the heat. *1400, loss of contact with lower level. 3. Security team dispatched. *1415, lockdown initiated. God help us. The handwriting on the last entry was erratic, the pen tearing through the paper. Subjects, I whispered. I wasn't alone. Here. The obsidian back in Montana wasn't a stray. It was an escapee. And this place, this was the kennel. A sound echoed from the corridor ahead. A metallic clang. Then the scrape of claws on concrete. I froze. The sound came from the direction of the main atrium. I hugged the wall, moving silently past the rows of dead monitors. I needed to find a way out, or at least a way to seal this place off. If there was a transit system connecting this hellhole to the surface world, nothing down here could be allowed to ride it. I reached the end of the control room and looked out Shattered observation window. My stomach dropped. The atrium was a massive cylindrical shaft, easily half a mile wide, dropping straight down into the crust. In the center of the shaft, suspended by massive chains the size of freight trains, hung a structure. It looked like a cocoon. It was made of black glass and metal, fused together in an organic, spiraling shape. It pulsed with a faint, violet light. Massive cables ran from the geothermal vents in the walls directly into the cocoon, feeding it power, feeding it heat, and crawling on the chains. I raised the Mossberg, using the optic to zoom in. They looked like ants from this distance, but I knew better. They were obsidians. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. They were scuttling up and down the chains, carrying things. I squinted. What were they carrying? White bundles. Roughly 6 feet long. Body bags? No. Cocoons. They were harvesting. Or relocating. I lowered the gun. My breath trembling. This wasn't just a monster movie. This was an infestation. The U.S. military hadn't just found a bunker, they had tapped into an ecosystem. They tried to harness the energy of the volcano, and instead, they woke up the tenants. Suddenly, the PA system crackled to life. It made me jump, nearly pulling the trigger. Asterisk. Automated alert. Seismic event imminent. Venting procedures. Initiated. All personnel to Sector 4 shelters. Asterisk. The voice was a synthesized, monotone drone from the 80s. The ground beneath me lurched. Dust rained down from the ceiling. A deep, resonant boom echoed up from the magma chamber, vibrating through the soles of my boots and into my teeth. In the central shaft, the violet light in the massive cocoon flared brighter. The obsidians on the chains stopped moving. They all turned their heads in unison. Toward the observation window. Toward me. Oh no! I muttered. A screech, magnified by the acoustics of the shaft, pierced the air. It sounded like metal tearing. The creatures detached from the chains, dropping onto the catwalks that spiraled around the shaft's perimeter. They were moving fast. And they were coming up to the control level. I turned and ran. I sprinted back through the control room, my boots slamming against the linoleum. I needed a defensible position. Or better yet, a map. I remembered seeing a blue schematic on the wall near the airlock. I skid to a halt in front of it. You are here, Level 1 command. Armory, Level 2. Tram dock, Level 1. Asterisk incinerator. Level 9, asterisk. The tram. I could get back to the tram. But the obsidian I fought in Montana had been in the launch bay. If I went back there, I'd be trapped in a metal box with nowhere to run. I looked at the armory. Level 2. Down one flight of stairs. If I was going to die in a hole beneath Wyoming, I was going to do it with more than 7 shotgun shells. I kicked open the stairwell door. The air inside was cooler, smelling of rust. I took the stairs 3 at a time. Asterisk clang. Clang. Clang, asterisk. Below me. Someone, something, was banging on the metal railing, running up the stairs to meet me. I stopped on the landing, leaning over the banister. Shadows danced on the walls below. The clicking of claws. A low, chittering sound, like crickets amplified 1,000 times. They were already in the stairwell. I looked up. The vent grate above the door I just came through. It was screwed shut, but the mesh was rusted. I didn't have time to unscrew it. I flipped the Mossberg around, using the stock like a hammer. Smash. The grate buckled. Smash! It fell inward with a clatter. I grabbed the lip of the vent and hauled myself up, scrambling into the tight, dusty ductwork just as the stairwell door below burst open. I lay flat in the darkness of the vent, holding my breath. Below me, I could hear them. Sniffing. Snarling. They sounded different than the first one. Smaller? Faster? I crawled. The duct was tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders. Screws snagged my jacket. Dust filled my nose, but I fought the urge to sneeze. I crawled for what felt like miles, though it was probably only 50 yards. The metal grew hot against my stomach. I was moving closer to the core systems. I saw light filtering through a grate ahead. I shimmied toward it and peered down. I was looking into a laboratory. But not a normal lab. It was a dissection theater. Stainless steel tables were arranged in a circle. On the center table lay one of the creatures. It was cut open, its black carapace peeled back to reveal, not organs, machinery. Hydraulics where muscles should be. Fiber optic cables woven into biological nerves. A fusion of flesh and tech. My mind reeled. They weren't just aliens. They were cyborgs. Weaponized, I whispered to myself. The U.S. military didn't find them. They made them. Or at least, they modified them. Project Tartarus wasn't about containment. It was about integration. A figure moved into my field of view below. It wasn't a creature. It was a man. He was wearing a tattered lab coat, gray with grime. His hair was wild, a white mane of matted tangles. He moved with a limp, dragging a heavy wrench behind him. He walked up to the dissected creature and patted its open chest cavity affectionately. "Soon, baby. Soon," the man croaked. His voice was like grinding gravel. "The heat is rising. Mama is waking up." He turned, and I saw his face. Half of it was human. The other half was obsidian. Black, shiny plating had grown over his left eye and cheek, merging with his skin. His left arm was elongated, the fingers tipped with jagged claws. A survivor? A collaborator? Or patient zero? He looked up, straight at the vent. His human eye was blue and watery. His obsidian eye was a cluster of red sensors that zoomed in and out with a mechanical whir. "I hear your heart, little mouse," he said, smiling to reveal teeth that had been filed into points. "You have a strong rhythm. Mama likes rhythm." He raised his mutated arm and pointed at the vent. "Get him out." The vent behind me shook. I scrambled forward, panic overriding stealth. I kicked out the grate below me and fell onto a steel table, scattering trays of surgical instruments. The half-man roared, swinging the wrench. I rolled off the table, the heavy iron tool smashing the steel where my head had been a second ago. I brought the Mossberg up. "Back off!" I screamed. He laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "Bullets? You think you can kill the future with lead?" He lunged. I fired. The buckshot hit him in the chest, staggering him. He fell back against a rack of test tubes, shattering glass. But he didn't go down. The black plating under his lab coat absorbed the impact. "Armor!" I cursed. He wiped a trickle of black blood from his mouth. "We are durable. We are the stone that walks." From the shadows of the lab, more shapes emerged. Not full obsidians. These were the husks. Failed experiments. Men and women in shredded military uniforms, their bodies twisted and fused with the black rock. They shambled forward, moaning in a chorus of agony and hunger. I pumped the shotgun. Click-clack. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling but loud. "You want heat?" I looked at the large yellow tank next to the dissection table. It was labeled xylene flammable. I didn't wait for an answer. I fired at the tank. The explosion threw me backward through a set of double doors. A wall of fire erupted in the lab, consuming the half-man and his husks. Their screams were high-pitched and terrible, mixing with the roar of the flames. I scrambled to my feet, my ears ringing. I was in a hallway now. The alarms were blaring for real this time. Asterisk. Fire detected in Sector 3. Halon suppression imminent. Sealing doors in 30 seconds. Asterisk. I ran. I sprinted down the corridor, following the signs for armory. The heat from the fire behind me was chasing me, licking at my heels. I slid around a corner and slammed into a heavy steel door marked Security Authorized Personnel Only. I tried the handle. Locked. I stepped back and fired. Around into the lock mechanism. The metal shattered. I kicked the door open. Inside, racks of M16s lined the walls. But they were rusted, useless blocks of oxidation. Time and humidity had destroyed them. Damn it! I frantically searched the room. Crates of ammo. Rotten. Grenades. Too unstable to touch. Then, in the back, inside a sealed glass case labeled Prototype XM24. I saw it. It wasn't a gun. It was a tool. A heavy industrial rivet driver, modified with a rotary barrel. And next to it, boxes of depleted uranium spikes. I smashed the glass with the butt of my shotgun. I grabbed the weapon. It was heavy, maybe 30 pounds, connected to a backpack power supply. I strapped the battery pack on. The weapon hummed to life, a digital counter illuminating. 500 rounds. I grabbed a bandolier of spikes and threw it over my shoulder. Door sealing, the PA announced. The blast door to the armory began to slide shut. I dove through the closing gap, scraping my shins, and rolled out into the main corridor. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that shook the floor. I stood up, hefting the rivet gun. It felt good. Solid. The fire in the lab had been contained by the blast doors, but the smoke was drifting into the hallway. And through the smoke I saw them. The obsidians. The pure ones. Not the mutated humans, but the sleek, perfected killing machines I had seen on the chains. There were 3 of them. They were clinging to the walls and ceiling, their multifaceted eyes glowing red in the haze. They blocked the path back to the tram. I looked behind me. The corridor led to a massive bulkhead door labeled Site B Caldera Access. The only way was forward. Deeper into the heat. I revved the rotary motor of the rivet gun. It whined like a jet engine turbine. All right, I snarled, the fear hardening into a cold, desperate rage. Let's see if you bleed. The first obsidian shrieked and leaped from the ceiling. I pulled the trigger. Thump, 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 thump. The rivet gun didn't bang, it chugged. 4 massive spikes, glowing with kinetic heat, tore through the air. They caught the creature in midair. The depleted uranium punched through the black carapace like it was wet cardboard. The creature was thrown backward, pinned to the far wall, thrashing as blue. Sparks showered from its wounds. The other 2 hesitated. They weren't used to prey that bit back. I didn't give them a chance to learn. I advanced, unleashing a hail of spikes. The heavy recoil battered my shoulder, but I kept the trigger down. The hallway turned into a slaughterhouse of sparks and screeching metal. I shredded them. When the gun finally clicked empty on the first belt, I was standing over twitching piles of black glass and gore. I reloaded, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the first spike. Focus, Bert. Focus. I moved to the caldera access door. It was unlocked. I spun the wheel and heaved it open. The heat that hit me knocked the wind out of my lungs. It was 120 degrees easily. I stepped out onto a gantry. And then I stopped. My weapon lowered. I was inside the volcano. The facility ended here, opening up into a colossal natural chamber. Below me, a lake of magma stretched for miles, bubbling and popping. But it wasn't the magma that froze my blood. Rising out of the lava lake was a structure. A black obsidian spire, taller than the Empire State Building. It was pulsing. And surrounding the spire, thousands of the creatures were swarming. They were building, expanding the hive. At the top of the spire, a massive rift was tearing open the air itself. A portal? A tear in reality? Through the tear I could see a sky. But not our sky. A purple, bruised sky with two pale moons. They weren't just living here. They were terraforming. They were turning Yellowstone into a gateway. And standing on the edge of the gantry, looking at the same nightmare, was a soldier. He was wearing modern tactical gear. High-cut helmet, quad nods flipped up, suppressed M4. No. Patches. He turned slowly to look at me. He didn't raise his rifle. He just looked tired. "You shouldn't be here, civilian," he said, his voice muffled by a gas mask. "What is this?" I yelled over the roar of the magma. He looked back at the spire. This is the contingency plan." "Contingency for what?" "For when the surface becomes uninhabitable." He pointed his rifle at the spire. "We made a deal with them. Technology for real estate. We gave them the caldera. They gave us the tech to survive what's coming. You sold out the human race? We saved the elite." He corrected. "But the deal is off. They're expanding too fast. The eruption is scheduled for T-10 minutes. Eruption?" He pulled a detonator from his vest. "We're not letting them take the surface. We're blowing the cap. We're triggering the supervolcano manually." My eyes went wide. "That will kill half the country. Better dead than them," he said, gesturing to the hive. He thumbed the safety cover on the detonator. "Wait!" I screamed. Before I could move, a massive shadow fell over us. A creature larger than any I had seen. A royal guard, armored in white. Spiked plating, climbed up the side of the gantry behind the soldier. "Behind you!" The soldier turned, but too late. The creature's tail, tipped with a scythe-like blade, whipped out. It sliced through the soldier's arm. The hand holding the detonator fell into the abyss below. The soldier screamed, falling to his knees. The creature roared and stepped onto the gantry, blocking the path back to the door, blocking the path to survival. I looked at the soldier, bleeding out. I looked at the detonator, tumbling down into the magma. I looked at the massive white monster in front of me. I revved the rivet gun. Act 3. I muttered, gritting my teeth against the sulfur and the heat. "Let's get crazy." I charged. The vibration of the pneumatic tool in my hands was the only thing grounding me to reality. The air screamed. Not just the hissing of the magma vents far below, or the mechanical groan of the dying facility, but the air itself seemed to shriek as the royal guard lunged. It was faster than something that size had any right to be, a blur of calcified white armor and glistening muscle. I didn't aim. You don't aim a rivet gun like a pistol. You shove it. I ducked under the horizontal slash of that scythe tail, feeling the wind of it part my hair, and drove the heavy industrial muzzle into what I hoped was a soft spot. The seam where the creature's leg met its hip. I squeezed the trigger. Thunk-iss. The rivet didn't penetrate fully, but the impact was like a sledgehammer. The superheated metal stud drove into the joint, fusing kite into flesh. The creature let out a sound that wasn't a roar. It was a high-frequency chirp that shattered the glass on the soldier's wristwatch. It stumbled, the leg seizing up instantly. Die, you ugly son of a bitch! I screamed, the adrenaline dumping into my system so fast my vision went white at the edges. I scrambled back, slipping on the soldier's blood. The creature thrashed, its tail hammering the metal grating of the gantry, sparking wildly. It was trying to reorient, to stand on the three good legs, its multiple eyes fixating on me with a malice that felt ancient. Intelligence. That was the worst part. It wasn't just hungry, it was hateful. The core. A wet gurgle came from behind me. I spun around. The soldier, name tag Red Miller, was propped up against the railing, his face pale as the ash falling around us. His left arm ended in a cauterized stump, steaming in the cold mountain air drifting down from the vents. Miller! The detonator's gone! I yelled, grabbing his flak jacket. How do we kill it? How do we kill the hive? Miller coughed, blood spraying the front of his fatigues. He pointed a trembling finger toward the massive cylindrical shape suspended in the center of the chamber. The warhead. A relic of the Cold War, stripped of its guidance systems, repurposed as a suicide pill for this very nightmare. Manual, override. The panel, underneath the casing. You have to bridge the circuit. Bridge it with what? I looked back. The Royal Guard had snapped the fuse joint of its own leg to free itself. It was limping toward us, dragging the dead limb, its mandibles clicking in anticipation. Behind it, on the cavern walls, the hive was stirring. Thousands of oblong shapes were peeling off the rock. The drones were waking up. With anything conductive, Miller wheezed. His eyes were glazing over. Get to the surface. 5 minutes, once the capacitors charge. 5 minutes before the mountain becomes a crater. Come on, I can drag you. I lied. We both knew I couldn't. Miller looked at the creature, then at me. He pulled a pin from a grenade on his belt, his last one. But he didn't throw it. He held it to his chest. Go. Make it count. Miller. Go. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the central platform, leaping over the gap where the gantry had buckled. Behind me, the roar of the creature was cut short by a thunderous, wet explosion. Shrapnel pinged off the metal walkway. I hoped it hurt the bastard. I hoped it bought me seconds. I reached the warhead. Up close, it was terrifyingly mundane. Just dull gray metal, stenciled with yellow warnings, explosive hazard. Authorized personnel only. Asterisk. It was the most American thing in this alien hellscape. Bureaucracy painted on the apocalypse. I fell to my knees, sliding under the underbelly of the bomb. There it was, a maintenance panel, bolted shut. I jammed the tip of the rivet gun into the gap and pried. The metal screeched, resisting, then popped open with a shower of rust. Inside, A mess of wires and heavy copper buzzbars. A digital timer sat dark and dead. The battery backup must have rotted away years ago. I needed to complete the circuit from the main capacitor to the firing squib. Conductive. I patted my pockets. Flashlight? Plastic body. Camera? Too complex. A shadow fell over the panel. I rolled out just as a spike of bones slammed into the intricate electronics, missing my head by an inch. Another Royal Guard. This one was smaller, faster, its armor streaked with gray. It hissed, rearing up. I was out of rivets. The gun was empty. I was holding a 10-pound paperweight. I looked at the creature. Then at the open panel. The copper bars were exposed. Hey! I shouted. Do you bleed? I threw the rivet gun. It spiraled through the air and cracked the creature in the faceplate. It didn't do damage, but it flinched. That was all I needed. I lunged, not at the monster, but at the heavy power cable running along the floor, the feed from the geothermal generator meant to power the facility's lights. I grabbed the severed end of the cable, stripped by time and rot. It was humming. Live voltage. Eat this. I jammed the live cable into the open panel of the nuke. Crack boom. Arc flash. Blue lightning exploded outward, throwing me backward across the grating. The smell of ozone overpowered the sulfur. The creature screamed as the electricity arched from the panel, jumping to its conductive wet armor, frying it from the inside out. It convulsed, smoke pouring from its spiracles, and collapsed. From the warhead, a low, rising tone began. A mechanical whine that vibrated in my teeth. The dead timer flickered to life. Red LEDs burning through the grime. 05:00. 4:59, ***. Okay. I gasped, staggering to my feet. My eyebrows were cinched, my hands shaking so bad I could barely make a fist. Run. Just run. The hive knew. A psychic shriek echoed through the cavern, not sound, but pressure in the skull. The walls turned black as the swarm detached. They weren't climbing anymore, they were falling, a rain of insects and claws, aiming to block the exit. I scrambled back toward the elevator shaft. The lift was dead, the cable snapped miles up. But the emergency ladder, the ladder was still there. I hit the first rung and began to climb. 04:30. My breath tore at my throat. My muscles burned. Every 10 feet, I passed the level of the silo I had explored on the way down. The labs. The barracks. The nursery. On the lab level, a door burst open. 3 drones, dog-sized, clicking fast, skittered onto the mesh landing. They saw me. They shrieked. I didn't stop. I kicked out, my boot connecting with the first one's head, sending it tumbling into the dark shaft. The second one latched onto my pant leg. I felt needles pierce the denim, grazing my calf. Get off! I slammed my elbow into its carapace, again and again, until it crunched and let go. The third one was gathering itself to jump. Above me, a pipe burst. Steam, scalding and white, hissed out, creating a barrier. I climbed through it, screaming as the heat blistered my neck. But the drone hesitated. The steam saved me. Good old American infrastructure failing at exactly the right moment. 03:00. I was halfway up. The noise below was deafening. A rising tide of chittering. They were climbing the shaft walls. A sea of black chitin rising like floodwater. I needed to go faster. I skipped rungs, lunging upward, my gloves tearing on the rusted steel. "Come on, Bert," I muttered, the persona slipping, just a scared man left underneath. "You wanted a story. You wanted the viral hit. Here it is. Don't die before you upload it." 02. 00 ****. I reached the blast doors of the upper bunker. This was it. The threshold between the nightmare and the world of the living. The wheel was rusted shut. No. No, no, no! I grabbed the valve wheel with both hands and heaved. It groaned. Friction and rust welded together by decades of neglect. Behind me, the sound of the swarm was getting louder. I could hear the click-click-click of claws on the ladder. I braced my foot against the wall and pulled until I felt something pop in my shoulder. Screech. The metal gave. The wheel turned. The hydraulic locks disengaged with a heavy thud-thud-thud. I pushed the heavy steel door open just enough to squeeze through. As I slithered into the airlock, a claw reached through the gap, snagging my backpack. I thrashed, slipping out of the straps. I left the bag. My camera, my lenses, my extra batteries, all of it. I left it all behind. I slammed the door shut and spun the locking wheel from the other side. Bang! Something hit the door. Then again. Asterisk bang. Bang. Bang, asterisk. They were knocking. 01:00. I was in the upper facility now. The garage. I could see the sliver of moonlight coming through. The camouflaged entrance tunnel way ahead. The Jeep, my rental, was parked there. I ran. I ran past the skeletons of the original crew. Past the dusty flags. Past the warnings. I vaulted into the driver's seat. Keys. Where were the keys? Pocket. I jammed them in. The engine turned over. Stalled. "Don't you do this to me! Not now!" I pumped the gas. The engine roared to life. A beautiful, trashy combustion symphony. I slammed it into reverse, spun the wheel, and floored it. The tires screeched on the concrete, kicking up dust. I shot up the inclined tunnel, the headlights illuminating the jagged rock walls. 00:30. I burst out of the mountainside. The Montana night air hit me like a physical blow, cold, crisp, smelling of pine needles and snow. The sky was an endless canopy of stars, indifferent to the horror beneath the earth. I didn't stop. I hit the logging road, the suspension of the SUV screaming as I bounced over ruts and roots. I needed distance. I needed the valley. 00:10. I was maybe 2 miles away. Not enough. Nowhere near enough. I saw the flash in the rearview mirror before I heard it. It wasn't a mushroom cloud. It was the mountain itself. The peak simply lifted. A crack of glowing orange light zigzagged across the granite face, and then the earth crumbled. The ground wave hit the car a second later. The SUV was tossed sideways like a toy. The world spun, sky, dirt, tree, sky, dirt. Glass shattered. Metal crumpled. Then silence. I woke up hanging upside down. The seatbelt was digging into my chest. The smell of gasoline was everywhere. I groaned, reaching up to unclasp the belt. I fell to the roof of the car with a crunch. I crawled out through the shattered windshield, dragging myself onto the damp moss of the forest floor. I looked back. The mountain was gone. In its place was a crater, glowing with a dull, angry red light. Smoke billowed up, blocking out the stars. The shockwave had flattened the trees for a mile in every direction, like matchsticks swept by a giant hand. It was over. I sat there in the dirt, shivering. I checked myself. Heavy bruising, cuts, a dislocated finger. I snapped back into place with a yelp. But alive. No bites. No scratches. I laughed. It started as a chuckle and turned into a hysterical, sobbing laugh that echoed in the dead silence of the woods. I began walking. The nearest town was 20 miles south. I had a long walk. 3 days later. The diner in Missoula was greasy, warm, and smelled like bacon. The best smell in the world. The waitress, a woman named Barb with hair the color of steel wool, poured me a fresh cup of coffee. She looked at my bandaged hands. "Rough week, hon?" she asked. "You could say that," I murmured, staring into the black liquid. "Hiking accident? Heard there was a landslide up near the old ridges." Fierce rumble woke my dog up. "Yeah," I said. "Landslide." I took a sip. It burned, grounding me. I reached into my jacket pocket. I had lost the camera. I had lost the footage. The world would never see the hive. They would never see the Royal Guard. They would call me crazy. Just another conspiracy nut in the American West. But I felt something in my pocket. Small. Hard. I pulled it out under the table. It was the SD card. I froze. I remembered now. Right before the final climb, when I dropped the bag, I had popped the card out of the camera. Habit. Muscle memory of a photographer. I had it. I looked at the tiny piece of plastic. The proof. The nightmare. If I uploaded this, panic. Chaos. The military would hunt me down. But if I didn't. I felt an itch on the back of my neck. I scratched it. My fingernail caught on something hard. A bump. Right under the skin. I froze. I pressed harder. It moved. The waitress came back by. "Need anything else, sweetie? Piece of pie?" I stared at her, sweat breaking out on my forehead. I could feel the bump wriggling, burrowing deeper. "No," I whispered. "Check, please." I looked out the window at the peaceful street. Pickups driving by. People walking dogs. Flags waving on porches. They had no idea. They thought the nukes kept them safe. They thought the borders were the problem. They didn't know what was growing underneath the soil. I clutched the SD card in one hand and grabbed a steak knife from the table with the other. I needed to get to a bathroom. I needed to cut it out. And then I had a video to edit. "Creepy Bert here," I whispered to no one, standing up, the knife hidden against my sleeve. "And you're not going to believe what I found." End of Act 4.